Well, hi there. This post is the direct result of a message I received from an automotive service professional. And it was especially meaningful to me and really poignant in a way. The person who sent the message was asking if I had any advice for him. He had just finished celebrating his 30th year in the industry, 30th year as a professional in the automotive service industry. And each one of those 30 years had surpassed the previous year in accomplishment and satisfaction. And what was bothering him was the fact that each of those years of increasing success brought with it a year of increasing stress as well. And he wanted to know if I had any words of advice on how to cope with, how to manage, how to handle all of those stressors in his life. And having somebody ask you for advice, if you take that responsibility seriously, is a big deal. And the thing that I thought of first was that I would have certainly answered that question very differently just 10 or 15 years ago, before I was diagnosed with bone marrow cancer, before I had the stem cell bone marrow transplant that saved my life. And when contemplating what advice I would give him and the difference that those years had made in my awareness and my perception, the only thing I could think of for sure was that they would be very different answers. Realistically, I probably would have told him to just suck it up and deal with it. That stress is just a natural part of being in business, and it wasn't real. It was conjured up. It was an illusion. And that the only thing that was real were the successes that he'd had, the achievements he'd accomplished, and to focus on that. That's not the answer I give him today, nor is it the answer that I gave him, because the answer that I would give him today is advised by everything I've experienced over the past, almost 3 years for the transplant and 7 years of being diagnosed with cancer. So I told him that in my opinion, at least today, that relationships are the real currency of a life well lived. The people you meet and how you relate to them through time is really critically important, perhaps more than anything else. It's something that I realized in a blinding flash of clarity that I experienced immediately after being told I had incurable bone marrow cancer and that I'd better go home and get my life in order, something that I hope none of you ever have to go through. But it's important to recognize that the only thing that really matters is the relationships of the people who we invite into our lives, our families or the family we choose and our friends. I told him something else about stress directly, and that's something that I learned very, very quickly. And that was based upon the fact that whatever else any of my doctors had to say about my circumstance, my condition, the disease that I was suffering, they all agreed on one thing, and that was that stress was like candy to catastrophic illness or serious disease, and it should be avoided at all costs, and that all of them wanted me to reduce the amount of stress in my life as much as possible to slow the cancer down. And it's something that I noticed immediately when I started trying to work smarter and not harder. And that means, working smarter and not harder means having the tools, technology, and the training necessary to leverage everything that you're doing, whether it's in the office and in your office at home, whether it's in your living room or at the shop or on the shop floor. As I said, the one thing that all my doctors agreed on was getting rid of that stress as quickly as possible and as much as possible. And unpacking that, unburdening yourself, shrugging your shoulders, and forcing that stress to shed is a really profound experience. If you haven't done it, you probably should. Certainly another way to avoid stress is to avoid carriers, those people that bring stress into your life. People who would much rather you deal with their stress than deal with it themselves. So, and it also means embracing and substituting experiences to help you reduce the stress. Something as simple as breathing correctly. And perhaps more important than that is being aware of when stress is trying to take over so that you can know when to breathe correctly. And the important role that physical activity plays in your survival and in coping and managing stress. Working out is important. Mindfulness and meditation are important. Breathing is incredibly important. Physical activities like taking a spin class or whatever it is that trips your trigger. I mean, running, walking, crawling, if you have to, anything that you can do to start moving and to stop thinking about whatever it is that's stressing you out and start thinking about getting healthier again. Do that. And the best way that I can tell anybody to do that, the easiest way to do that, and to make time to do that, because we're all very, very good at not making time for ourselves, making time for everyone else, perhaps, would be to go ahead and make sure that you actually pencil in those activities on your to-do list. Because believe me, they're of equal importance to most anything else that you're going to be doing. So, recognizing and realizing that all of this stuff is much easier to talk about than it is to actually accomplish, than it is to do. I think that it's important to recognize that something as simple as realizing that there is stress in your life, to understand how it's developing, where it's coming from, and then the simple answer is to just stop succumbing to it. Stop letting it dominate you. Stop taking all of this stuff too seriously. None of it's really that serious. Nobody's going to get out of here alive. So let it go. Sometimes it's easier to say than to do, but you'll never know how easy it is to do unless you try. And you'd be surprised at how good you can get at just letting stuff go that seems more important than it is. And that brings me to the next thing that I told him, and that was to try and differentiate between urgent and important. They're not the same thing. And you can get very caught up in urgent at the expense of what's really important. And reducing stress in your life is one of those things that's really important. Just focus on the things that are guaranteed to help you manage the quality of your life, manage the stress so you can improve the quality of your life. Focus on that and not all the stuff that's chipping away at it all the time. And another way to do that, and an important way to do that, is service. Serving others is a great way to reduce stress in your life. It'll fill your heart with joy and satisfaction, and it'll fill in all the cracks and crevices where stress wants to live, where it likes to hide, so it can take advantage of you later. There are two other things that I think are important if you're going to talk about managing a life in which stress is a reality, and it's a reality for all of us, regardless of how hard we try to manage it. And that is create an inventory of all of your successes. Think about where you started. Think about how far you've come. Think about all the crazy challenges you've had to face and you've transcended. Recognize that part of your resume, which I would really urge all of you to update regularly, whether you're working or not, will help you understand how far you've come and what you've accomplished, and perhaps help you feel better about what you're doing and how you're doing it. And I guess finally, the last two things that I told him were that we should all avoid getting trapped into a situation in which monkey management occurs. Some of you know about monkey management because I've written about it over the years quite often and extensively. William Onken, one of the foremost writers on management principles, developed the concept of monkey management, and you've all had this happen to you probably. Somebody's come to you with a problem, either at work or at home, and you can actually see that problem sitting up on their shoulder like it's a monkey, and it's very, very content to be there, making that person's life miserable, and that person needs some help with a project or needs some help with something they're working on, and they ask you for that help. And when they ask you for that help, if you accept, if you allow them to unburden themselves, you can actually watch that monkey jump from their shoulder to your shoulder. And instead of managing their progress, you will find them managing you. Did you feed my monkey? Did you bathe my monkey? Are you taking care of my monkey? Is he happy? And if you aren't, well, you'd better get on it. And I don't think anybody wants to be in that position. Because it's a position in which you have no influence or control because it's not your monkey. And stress flourishes anywhere there is responsibility without influence or control. It's the true definition of frustration, actually. And the time to avoid that is before you allow it to happen. And finally, the last thing is that stress comes in two flavors for most of us. There's good stress and bad stress. And what they do to your body is almost equal as far as how those chemicals and in your body are released and whatnot. And there's good stress and there's bad stress. And good stress is the kind of stress good stress is the kind that happens when you're doing meaningful work, challenging work that gives you satisfaction, and you're confronted with things like that. Not that there is no stress involved in those activities, but it's a different kind of stress. And it's mitigated to some degree by the satisfaction that you feel in getting those jobs done and done well. Bad stress is something else entirely. It's being challenged with problems that aren't yours to solve and that you can't solve, that aren't easily solved, or work that isn't meaningful, being forced or being surrounded by people that are malignant or selfish or self-absorbed, that are incompetent, that aren't interested in learning, that aren't interested in growing. And it's important that you recognize who they are and what they steal from you, and the fact that they have no right to do that. I told him all of these things, within the context of the response that I sent to him, and some additional things here that occurred to me after I pressed the send button. We all have choices. That's what free will is all about. We all have choices as to whether how much we're going to allow stress to rule our lives. But I can tell you from personal experience that eliminating the stress from my life probably saved my life. And hopefully, if you start to manage your stress carefully, in a meaningful way, you'll find that life is a lot better. The quality of your life improves dramatically. The alternative, of course, is to drown in a sea of stress. And I think we should all probably demand more from our lives than that. We should all be careful to avoid sleepless nights, headaches, and ulcers. All of the fabulous parting gifts stress leaves in its wake. In the meantime, stay well, take care. This is probably the last post on this site for this year. I appreciate all of you so much. There is another post that I just finished that was going up on the mswbook.com site that I think you might find interesting as well. Why don't you go over there and take a quick look at it? Other than that, stay well, happy holidays, and my best wishes for a spiritually rewarding and meaningful new year coming up, a year without stress.